you, David. Good morning, everyone. Every 365 days, we turn the page to a new year. Some of us turn that page joyfully because we've had a really difficult year the past year, and we're excited about a new year. Some of us are reluctant to turn the page because we've had a great year, and we don't want to move on from this past year. We're almost timid to move into the unknown of a new year. Some of us just flat out don't care. You see time as, hey, look, there's not much different in this year as there was last year. Time marches on. But this year, just like all other years, will bring a number of different things. This year will bring times of confusion. You will have situations that cause you to question certain things. There will be moments and times of joy. There will be times of potential difficulty. This year will bring all sorts of things, but one thing that this year is certain to bring are God-given opportunities. Opportunity, according to the dictionary, is a set of circumstances that make it possible to do something. So when you consider your own life right now, in your life, there are circumstances that have made it possible for you to do something. Now, some of you are very opportunistic. You see those opportunities and you seize those opportunities. Others may be somewhat indifferent to the opportunities that the Lord has put in your life. But this series called Strategically Placed, I hope, helps you understand and conclude that the circumstances in your life, whether they are good or bad, are God-given and provide for you God-given opportunities to know God and make God known. That is what it means to be strategically placed. God-given circumstances for God-given opportunities to know God and make Him known. Now, this is a 7-week series, and 6 of the 7 weeks are going to focus on the what and the how. What are we to do, and how are we to do it as it relates to being strategically placed? I hope those weeks will feel very, very practical. But before we get into the practical, the what and the how, I think it's important that we consider the why. Why should you and I take seriously the God-given circumstances for God-given opportunities to know God and make God known? Acts 17, verse 22 through 27 helps us answer that question. And what Paul does there is he invites the individuals that he's speaking to, the men of Athens, but he also invites us to be captivated by the God in which he is describing, the one true God, the God as the Bible presents him. A few years ago, I traveled to Switzerland, and we were staying in a town called Grindelwald. And when we pulled into the city by train, it was dark and it was late, so we were hungry. So the first thing that we did when we got off the train was set out to find dinner. And as we were walking the winding roads of Grindelwald, we were going up and we were going down, and it was very dark because it was late. And the only way that you could see anything, you could see the storefronts and the restaurant fronts because the street lights had lit those things up. And as we're walking to the city, moving to the restaurant, all of the roads essentially converged on this spaghetti shop in the middle of town where you could get a very high-priced bowl of spaghetti and meatballs. And everything converged right here. So we ate, and when we left, it came time to go up to where we were staying. And it was back behind the restaurant. You had to climb up a hill or climb up a mountain. We checked ourselves in, and the next morning, when we woke up, it was cloudy. And when you looked out, you couldn't really see much because we were high enough up, and the cloud coverage prevented us from really seeing what was going on. So we decided to head down toward the town, and we started walking down the streets. And when we were walking up to the place that we were staying, the Swiss Alps, the mountains were behind us. But when we were coming back down, we're walking in the direction of those mountains. We got down to where the restaurant was, and we went to round the corner, and the cloud coverage had lifted at that point. It was sunny, and we were low enough to see what was going on. And the road just ran down, and you could see all these storefronts. And at the end of the road were the Swiss Alps. And when we rounded that corner, it literally stopped every one of us in our tracks. We found ourselves in awe of what we were looking at. we could not believe how beautiful and how massive that mountain was. We just stood there, staring, speechless, in disbelief. See, many of us were used to the Smoky Mountains, but we had never seen the Swiss Alps. And I mean, no disrespect to the Smoky Mountains, but they were as like the rolling hills of Birmingham compared to the Swiss Alps. And seeing that mountain, it left us captivated. And what it made us want to do was to make the absolute most of our time there. Psalm 8:3 essentially says that the mountains that stopped me in my tracks were the work of his fingers. So as amazing as creation is, there is a creator behind it all. And if we're in awe of creation, who we should really be in awe of is the creator. The Bible, as God portrays him, is nothing to yawn at. It's nothing to ignore. It's nothing to dismiss. Instead, the Bible intends for you and I to be left in awe of who God is. Paul was left in awe of who God was. And the reality of Paul's view of God caused him to live a particular way. My hope and my prayer this morning is that we see God for who he is, that it leaves us in awe of him, and it affects the way in which we live our lives. So let's read Acts 17, verse 22 through 27. It says, "So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, 'Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, so that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us.'" When we come to Acts 17, verse 22 through 27, Paul is on the run. When you read what's taken place prior to this passage, you see that Paul has been run off from several cities. And he currently finds himself in Athens, where he's waiting on Timothy and Silas. He's a sort of evangelistic fugitive at this point. And everywhere that he goes, Paul spends time reasoning with the people of that city from the scriptures and seeking to prove and explain why it was necessary that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Well, while he's waiting in Athens, Paul begins to leverage the God-given circumstances that he has to make God known. Paul knew that he had been strategically placed by God in Athens. So this passage, these few verses that we're looking at this morning are very much an apologetic appeal to unbelievers to believe in God, to worship God alone. Now, beginning in verse 24, Paul is going to describe God in 5 different ways. And those 5 different ways in which Paul describes God are unique to him. No other person, no other God, no other nothing can be described in this way. He says that he is creator. He says that he is Lord. Paul describes God as provider. He describes him as sustainer. And he tells us that he is sovereign. Now we're going to look at each one of these things a little more in depth this morning. But before we do that, I want you to look at how Paul begins the conversation in verse 22. "So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, 'Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious.'" A Google search this past week told me that there were 4,000 religions in the world. So 4,000 recognized religions in the world. A religion is a system of behaviors, practices, beliefs, morals, worldviews, and text that people ascribe and hold to. That's a lot of different recognized and organized religions around the world. You may be surprised that the overwhelming majority of the world's population ascribes to a religion. The statistic says that 84% of people worldwide ascribe to some form of religion. Now, 31% of that 84% hold to Christianity. That's what many of you in this room ascribe, affirm, and hold to. That's what feels familiar to you. But this room is not actually an accurate reflection of the religion that's going on in the world. Because right now, all over the world, there are people who are practicing their religion. They're devoting their worship to something or someone other than the God of the Bible. Many of us we sing songs that declare our worship to God. You could go to places around the world. They would sing different songs. It would probably look different and sound different, but they would be going through their practices in an effort to show worship to whatever God they have deemed to be the God that they want to worship. So just like Paul, we could visit places around the world and conclude that people in every way are very religious. The Areopagus was a physical location, but it was also representative of a court of people who had authority and jurisdiction over civil cases in a matter of religion. So when Paul stands there, he's not only standing in a physical location, he's addressing a very real and religious people. Paul qualifies just how religious they are in two different ways. He uses a phrase, every way. That is the idea that they are fully and completely religious. Then he uses the word very, that is, they're devout. So when Paul is sharing about the God of the Bible, we need to understand that he's not sharing with on-the-fence type religious people. Paul is sharing with all-in, put sticker on the car type religious people. They are very religious. And their zeal for their religion becomes the door of opportunity for Paul to walk through and share about the one true God of the Bible. We see a textbook example of what it means and how to share the truth of who God is with people who do not believe. Now, around you, you have people that do not hold to the same religion that you hold to. It's entirely possible that when you go to work tomorrow, that you will work along someone who identifies as a Muslim. It's possible that there's someone who may practice Buddhism in your neighborhood. They live a few doors down. You may have someone who's agnostic in your family. They may have recently sat around your Christmas table. It's possible that you interact with regularly people that hold to different religions. But by and large, most of the people that we rub shoulders with due to our geographical location would affirm and ascribe to Christianity. Yet some of you might question their commitment to the God of the Bible. You might wonder if they really understand the gospel. You might question their devotion to the Lord because you look at their life and you get the sense that they're committed to all sorts of other things at a much deeper level than God. You would say they've got all sorts of idols in their life that they are giving themselves to, that they are orienting their lives around. But the truth is that whether they ascribe to an entirely different religion, or whether they claim to be Christian and yet do not devote their lives to the Lord, both are in need of the same God. Both need to hear the same good news that God is willing to save them. Now look at Paul's awareness for the situation in verse 23. He says, "For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." Some of you love a good buffet. Some of you are repulsed by any buffet. And the reason why you love a good buffet is because you love the variety that it offers. If you wake up one morning and you're like, you know what, I'm craving fried chicken, pizza, stir fry, and everything else, then you're going to be a fan of a buffet because you can go there and you can put it all on your plate. Paul, as he's walking the streets of Athens, essentially observes a buffet of religion. Acts chapter 17, verse 6, we're told that the city of Athens was full of idols. John Stott describes it as a city smothered in idols. Everywhere that Paul turned, he saw objects and worship devoted to phony gods. Verse 16 of Acts 17, we're told that Paul's spirit is provoked. That is, his emotions and his feelings are stirred up within him, and that can be positive or negative. It's simply the idea that you see something or someone and it causes you to be upset, but your being upset is not absent of concern. It's essentially loving anger. If you were to look out the window this afternoon and you were to see a toddler, maybe your toddler, playing in a busy intersection, a busy street, unsupervised, I'm assuming that you're going to be provoked. Your heart is going to drop. Anger is going to rise, but you're not going to want to hurt them, I hope. Instead, the anger that you feel in that moment is going to be drenched in love, and you're going to have the end goal of what? Protecting them, rescuing them, snatching them out of the road because you care for them, because you're concerned for them. Yes, you were angry, but your anger was loving. That is what Paul is feeling here. And I've talked to enough people to know that when you figuratively walk down the streets of our society, many of you are provoked. You feel like there are all sorts of idols that are just smothering the world in which we live in. And it's made you angry. And I would go as far as to say it's okay to be angry, so long as it's a biblical anger. But I wonder if some of us are doing the angry side of provoked really well, but we're not marrying it with love and compassion. And folks, when we don't marry it with love and compassion, then we end up being driven by anger, by apathy, and disgust. And that is not what Paul is driven by here. He felt a holy burden for the masses of people that were having their lives smothered by dead gods and idols. His heart broke. Jesus in Matthew 9:36 saw the crowds and he felt compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd. We should care about the idols that smother our society. It should make us angry, but the solution is not to just stay burning angry. The solution is Jesus. And calling those who are devoting their lives to false gods to believe in the one true God of the Bible. So here's a radical thought. What if instead of demonizing those who are consumed with idolatry, what if our hearts broke for them? What if we asked that God would give us a holy burden for those who don't know Christ? Paul had a burden for those who did not know Christ. But not only was he burdened, he was aware. That word observed in verse 23 means to look at carefully. It implies that he took and had considerable amount of mental activity as he looked at the idols that lined the streets. He thought deeply about what he saw. He thought deeply about what they meant. And it allowed Paul to see the opportunities where he might be able to turn that conversation toward the God of the Bible. For Paul, that opportunity came when he looked and he saw an altar devoted to an unknown God. So as he walked the streets, he saw all sorts of idols, and they were devoted to specific gods. But then he looked over and he said, wait a minute. That's an altar, and it's devoted to an unknown God. That tells you how rampant the idolatry was there. It's like a junk drawer for religious worship. When you go in your house, you've got a closet or you've got a drawer, and you don't even want to think about it because it is full of everything. And anything, you just throw it in there because it's a catch-all drawer. That's essentially what this altar is. Hey, we want to make sure that we're covering our bases, that we don't miss any gods that could be out there. So this one's to the unknown God. Paul says, I want to make known to you who the unknown God is. I want to tell you about my God. I want to tell you about the one true God. Paul, in doing so, reveals that he has a very, very high view of God. And you may not think about it that often, but I believe that having a high view of God matters greatly for you and me. We need a high view of God, and I want to show you why I believe that. Take your view of marriage. If you have a very low view of marriage, I'm going out on a limb and assuming you're not a very good spouse. Why would you feel the need to be a great spouse if you have a low view of marriage? Take responsibility. If you have a low view of responsibility, I'm assuming you're probably irresponsible and lazy. Why would you feel the need to be responsible if you have a low view of responsibility. So I would argue that if we have a low view of God, we won't really care about honoring Him with our everyday lives. Why would we feel the need to be obedient to Him if we don't have a high view of who He is? Paul describes who that God is starting in verse 24. He says, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is He served by human hands as though He needed anything, since He Himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So there was Paul in this place in Athens, surrounded by people that were extremely religious. He's observed their environment, and their environment and what he's observed has revealed to him their spiritual condition. It's left him broken. But I want you to pay attention to what he does in light of his brokenness. What does Paul do in light of what he has seen? He shares with them about God. Folks, we all need to be aware. We need to be regularly observing what's going on around us in an effort to better understand the spiritual condition of those around us. And what we observe when it's anti-God, it should provoke us. It should give us a holy burden. But the end goal isn't just burden. It's actually sharing with the lost about who God actually is. Imagine that you were tasked with reviewing the safety and the reliability of what was set to be the most popular vehicle purchased in 2022. Someone came to you and they said, look, I want every dab of information about this vehicle so that we can tell people whether it's safe or not. You took your job seriously. You observed carefully. You did exhaustive research. And your findings revealed that it was defective in a way that it would be fatal for anyone who drove the vehicle or rode in the vehicle. Your findings left you upset. They left you angry at the danger that this vehicle posed. You wept at night. But now imagine that you never said anything. You never shared your findings. You never went back to the person who tasked you with the research and shared with them what was going on. Folks, if you did that, that's manslaughter. That's not rescue. That's negligence, not concern. That's cruel, not caring. True brokenness for the lost manifests itself in actually sharing the gospel. We aren't simply to just observe the idols that are smothering the lives of those around us. We aren't just to observe the idols that are smothering our lives. We aren't just to be provoked only to sit in silence like Paul. We are to observe, find ourselves provoked, and then make the God we know known to those who do not know him. Paul does so in verse 24, and he describes him in 5 ways. Look at the first way that he is described. He describes him as creator. Look at the first part of verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it. None of the gods that were being worshipped in Athens could be described in the way in which Paul is about to describe the God of the Bible. None of the gods, none of the idols that people worship in our society can be described as creator. He brought everything, humanity, you and I included, into existence. So that means every jaw-dropping mountain range, every ocean that goes on as far as the eye can see, every stunning sunset, every animal that soars through the air, every animal that strides across land, every human being that you have ever laid eyes on is his handiwork. Created by him, his creative genius at work. If you created something today, do you know what you would likely do? Get a patent on it to say you made it. It's yours. His patent is stamped across the Swiss Alps, the Pacific Ocean, the bald eagle, the lion, and every human being who has ever existed. Created by God, his handiwork on display. The second way that he's described is Lord. It says, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth. The idea that he's Lord means that he has supernatural authority over what he creates. He rules that which he creates. He didn't bring things into existence and say, I did a great job. Now I can clock out. He didn't check out. He continues to be ruling and active over that which he created. All of the chaos, all of the good things that we see. Throughout all of history, he has been ruling over heaven and earth. We see number 3 and number 4 in verse 25. It says, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Number 3, he's provider. It should bring us immense comfort in knowing that God is not dependent upon anything. God doesn't need the same things that we need. Some of you are exhausted. You need sleep. Some of you right now, you missed out on breakfast. So the only thing you're thinking about is, I've got to get some food in my stomach. Some of you woke up and the first thing you thought was, I've got to get food in my stomach. We're a needy people. God designed us that way, to need certain things. He doesn't need the same things we need. He is not in need. God is not desperate for us, but we are desperate for him. We need to wrap our mind around that truth, that he's not desperate for us, but we are desperate for him. Now, that makes his desire to use us that much more amazing. God doesn't need us, but he desires us. He could accomplish his purposes without us, but he willingly uses us by strategically placing us where we are. Number 4, not only is he the provider, he's the sustainer. Everyone in this room, take a deep breath. Why were you able to do that? Because God said, here, I'll give you another breath. The same God who gave us our first breath sustains us until our last. None of the gods who were smothering the streets and the society and the lives of Athens could do any of that. None of the gods who are smothering, none of the idols who are smothering the lives of our society and our world can do that. Yet there are some today, some even here this morning, that are giving your lives, you're orienting your worship toward a God who doesn't even exist. Instead of worshiping the one true God, you're building your life around. You're orienting your life around a God who doesn't exist. We end up devoting ourselves to creation rather than Creator. We end up worshiping that which is ruled instead of the Lord. We orient our lives around that which needs provision and sustaining instead of the one who is actually doing the providing and the sustaining. Now, the last thing we see is in verse 26 and 27. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. Verse 27, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. This is one of my favorite verses in all of the Bible, because I think it answers one of the most important questions we might ever ask. The question of, why am I here? Why am I living where I'm living? And why am I living where I'm living when I'm living there? This verse helps answer that question. Verse 26 says, because God said right then and right there is where I want you. Paul tells the crowd then, and he tells us now that number 5, God is sovereign. The idea here is that when you survey history, what you find are all sorts of nations, and you find all sorts of powers. And Paul is saying that when you look at those nations and when you look at those powers, what you find is that they have all been subject to God's sovereignty. Now, what are nations made up of? People, individuals, right? So when you boil it down, not only are nations subject to his sovereignty, you and I are subject to his sovereignty. God takes strategic ownership of where you are. You are not where you are by random chance. The time in which you have been given is the exact time in which you were supposed to have. All throughout history, not one person has existed at the wrong time. Everyone who has ever been born has not been born 1 minute too soon or 1 minute too late. God cares about our days. Some of you feel as though you would thrive in a different era. You feel as though you were better suited for the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Some of you were alive in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. but you feel as though you would have been better suited for that decade. But God says, right here, right now, is where I've placed you. The decade and the days you see are the exact ones that you were meant to be a part of. Where you live and how long you live there has been fixed and determined by God. That should cause us to not want to waste our allotted periods and our dwelling place. Well, how do I make sure that I'm not wasting the time in which God's given me? And how am I making sure that I'm making the most of where God has placed me? I believe it starts with allowing yourself to be captivated by the God who has strategically placed you exactly where you are. I got an email about Bourbon Sullins. Some of you know who Bourbon is. And you know that Bourbon recently had a pretty large tumor removed from his body. And as a result, one of the after effects of that surgery is that Bourbon's kidneys are not functioning as they should. So as a result, he's going to the dialysis center 4 times a week for treatment. Bourbon will be the first to tell you that he desires and is praying that God would heal his kidneys. He doesn't want to have to keep going to the dialysis center 4 times a week for treatment. But toward the end of the email, it shared Bourbon's perspective. And Bourbon now sees the dialysis center as his mission field. He sees it as the place that God has given him an opportunity to go in and share about the Lord and pray with others. That's what it means to be strategically placed. Bourbon understands. God, you're sovereign over my kidneys. God, you can heal my kidneys. But here I am in need of dialysis. And when I walk through those doors, I understand that I'm going to sit down, I'm going to get treatment next to people that might not know who you are. But I do. I have the opportunity to share with others about who you are and what you've done with my life. That is God-given circumstances for God-given opportunities to know God and make him known. Bourbon is not the only one with God-given circumstances for God-given opportunities to know God and make God known. Every single one of us has that same opportunity. There are people around you based on the circumstances where God has afforded you the opportunity to be used by him in ministering to that person, praying for those individuals, caring for those people, and ultimately sharing Christ with those individuals. None of you are here this morning by accident. You have been strategically placed, and for some, I want you to consider the providence of God in you being here. There are unbelievers who are here this morning. Maybe you are like those in Athens who are just smothered by the idols of the world. Maybe you are like those in Athens who have just given your life and your worship to an unknown God. But you could be a million places in the world right now. And yet God has you here hearing about the one true God who is creator, Lord, provider, sustainer, and sovereign. Could it be that God is not actually far from you, as verse 27 says? Might today be the day where you come to understand that God is your rescuer? Where by faith you confess your sin, you believe in the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and that unknown God becomes known? But there are also believers here today. And there are those of you that maybe have had opportunities that you've been putting off. You've been keeping at an arm's distance because you're somewhat afraid of what it means to be obedient to that opportunity. Others of you now immediately were confronted with families or individuals where you know that God has put them in your life for a particular reason. You were here this morning so that you could be reminded that you are strategically placed. That God has put you where you are, that you might know him and make him known. Folks, if we're going to live faithfully in light of God strategically placing us where we are, then it's going to start with us being captivated by the one who has strategically placed us. Would you bow your heads? I want you to think about and pray through a few different things right now. Would you ask, for those of you that would say, I'm very frustrated by my circumstances. I don't like the hand that I've been dealt. Would you pray that God would give you a better perspective on your circumstances? Would you pray that He would help you to discern those circumstances for the opportunities, the God-given opportunities that He has put in your life? Some of you know that based on your circumstances and the opportunity that's clearly in front of you, that you need to take a step of faith and to be obedient to what the Lord's asking you to do. But there's some reluctance and some nerves on your part. Would you ask that God would help you to be obedient? Ask Him to help you take that step of faith and seize the opportunity that He has given you. If you're an unbeliever here this morning, I want to talk specifically to you. It's no accident that you are here this morning. And maybe this morning has been a morning where you feel as though you've been directly confronted. There were some who heard what Paul had to say, and they received it joyfully. They became a follower of Jesus. They came to believe in the one true God. But there were others who heard Him and dismissed Him. I pray this morning, if you're an unbeliever here and you have heard about the one true God of the Bible and the good news that He has sent His Son to make it possible for you to be forgiven of your sins, that you would not dismiss that, but that you would receive that joyfully. That you would consider the fact that you could be all sorts of places and yet God has you here. So if you're here this morning, you would say, you know what? My life has been smothered by idols. My life has been marked by me giving my worship to all sorts of things, but the God of the Bible is not the one I've been worshiping. Maybe today is the day where that God becomes known to you. If you would like to know what it means to be saved by Jesus, to be righteous before God, then I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to look up and make eye contact with me. If you want to know what it means to be transformed by the good news of the gospel and to have a relationship with the only God who exists, again, I'm going to ask you to look up at me. For those that are looking up at me right now and making eye contact, I want to invite you after this service is over to have a conversation with me or one of our other pastors, or maybe the person that invited you and brought you. I want you to tell that person, I want the unknown God to be known. I want to have a relationship with him, and we would love to have that conversation with you. Heavenly Father, thank you for who you are. Thank you that you are greater than we can even wrap our minds around. Thank you that as we begin a new year with so many unknowns, we begin it knowing that nothing is unknown to you. We begin it knowing that we are loved by you. We begin it knowing that you are ruling over all. Help us, Lord, to have a high view of you. And help that high view to express and trickle down into showing itself by the way in which we live every single day. It's in Jesus' name.